Hello and welcome to the Deep Dive Perspective. Do like, share, subscribe to our channel. We desperately need people to link into channels like ours because we often are being censored because what we say is the truth. And today we have Professor Steve Keen, rebel economist extraordinaire, somebody who doesn't mince his words, who's actually going to unpack for us the implications of what seems like a quite mad economic program globally that is being triggered largely by Donald Trump and his erratic decisions around the various wars that he's stoking up, things which he said he was never going to do, but here he is. Donald Trump is part of that class of economically prosperous individuals who tie into what many would say the Epstein class. But Professor Steve Keen doesn't deal in theories, he deals in the realities of the economic fallout. We've got two major wars that are definitely going to impact the whole world. You know, one in Ukraine and one is targeting Iran and West Asia. Professor Steve Keen, welcome to the show.
Well, the wars themselves are, clearly massively destructive enterprises, but they're massively profitable enterprises for the companies that make the weapons. And this is a point that General and President Dwight D. Eisenhower made in his way out of office, I think in 1960 when he had his second term. And he literally coined the phrase, the military-industrial complex. And that, in some ways, in my own research, I downplay that to some extent and say what really worries me is not the military-industrial complex, but the financial-political complex where the finance sector basically runs the politicians. But I have to say, looking at what's been happening with the war in Iraq, the conflict in Ukraine, the invasion of Venezuela, all these things are a clear sign that the military-industrial complex is still in charge. And though the rest of us suffer very badly from the damage that these wars do to the productive capability of the planet, the military companies that create the weapons that are used in these conflicts make a lovely profit out of it. And this is why I think there's such an emphasis for America to go to war. And Donald Trump is complicit enough and stupid enough, frankly, to indulge it in this. And now the military-industrial complex, people are talking about spending up to 20% of the budget on war alone. And this is all stuff which is highly profitable for the companies that supply the weapons, highly destructive for the rest of us. And in that way, I think this is a classic case of what happens when you let politics, where we let money buy politicians. And this is the great problem. The bureaucrats in the Pentagon want the weapons. The companies want to create the weapons. They persuade the government to do it by creating paranoia about wars or potential challenges to America, or they see ways that America can control the global energy supplies, and we end up with these ridiculous conflicts that basically damage everybody, except the military-industrial complex.
Well, just to give people an idea, the various JASMA, HIMAR, and other weaponry that Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, etc., are supplying the industrial military complex, specifically the Anglo-Zionist imperialist one, it's a phenomenal business. It's probably bigger business than oil. I do know that every one of those missiles can cost up to $500,000 plus, and counting.
$500,000 for the tail fins. I mean, these weapons often cost, $5 and $10 million each. And one of the reasons that America is suffering so badly in the war against Iran is that the military-industrial complex is mainly there for the money it makes for those companies rather than for the actual effectiveness of the American system. So we're seeing America rapidly depleting the weapons that it actually has, running out of the stocks, not being able to produce them fast enough. This is all a result of, in many ways, the military-industrial complex being there as a money-making machine rather than a weapons-making machine. So the weapons cost a fortune. There's not enough of them. They can't make them fast enough to get into a real conflict, which is what's happening with Iran right now. They simply can't maintain the muscle. So as well as being a perversion of what democracy is all about, it's also a perversion of the war itself, because the military-industrial complex is one reason America is going to lose the war against Iran.
So the US has a budget of around $1 trillion. It might even be more. That was the last count I'd picked up. And I've just had this bizarre set of allegations, at the moment, I guess I can put them, that the Abraham Lincoln has now had its naval personnel out on duty for, I think, something like 220 days or some record number of days, if I'm not mistaken. And there's a kind of almost going up in arms within the actual the vessel itself, the actual battleship, and apparently now there's another ship being sent to relieve it. It's interesting that at the same time we talk about the industrial military complex, and they're making these 500 million plus missiles. But when it comes to the ordinary military personnel, they actually are saying they haven't got enough money to be able to maintain the armies. And in fact, the US doesn't seem to have enough finances to be able to land the kind of military force it did in Vietnam. Yet here we are still trying to fight a war which seems unwinnable now, but also happy to spend more money building these weapons to kill civilians, because one of the most heinous crimes that has been committed so far, clearly, is the 168 children who were killed in Al-Minab school in Iran with very sophisticated high-tech Tomahawk weaponry. And here we are with that industrial military complex doing what nobody wants it to do, which is to target civilians and children, as they did in Gaza. What's the status of all of that? Can they make mistakes like this?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in many ways, the military-industrial complex is a performative rather than a substantive facet. So as long as America doesn't use its weapons, it looks like it's really powerful. And the reason it is only powerful when it doesn't use the weapons is that the profits that are being made by creating those missiles and the sheer cost of them and the momentum of the past. You make the weapons you made previously. You don't necessarily innovate for things like going from massive missiles to small drones. All this stuff is making huge profits for the firms themselves, and they want to continue building up a stockpile that that never has to be used. The best weapon is one you basically dies of old age rather than dying by killing children at a primary school. So the sheer profitability of making the weapons is what has maintained America to create weapons which have now been made obsolete by developments of low-cost drones and targeting technologies. And so you have Iran, which was truly building weapons to defend itself because it knew it faced a existential threat from both Israel and America, and it also had the animosity of the Sunni religions, Arab countries on the other side of the Persian Gulf. It knew it had to make defense for its own basis, and therefore I think we're now finding how effective its targeted development of weaponry for self-defense has been. America's is all performative, and the thing is, unless the performance wins very rapidly, then they become what the Chinese used to call a paper tiger, and this is what we're seeing now: a paper tiger fighting a real one.
Well, the US has fired a lot of missiles at the Islamic Republic of Iran. They initially said they were doing it because of the nuclear capability that Iran was developing.
Yeah.
That seems to have all died away. And now we've got this focus on the Hormuz. And that, of course, is another economic factor. Those ships that can't get out of the Hormuz, the oil that can't get out, the fertilizer that can't get out, that's obviously going to have a massive effect on the economy of the world. That's on the one hand. And you'd have thought that the likes of Larry Fink or all the financial political complex which you talked about would have been quite concerned about that. But it seems as though at the moment what seems to be taking precedent, as you said, is the military objective. I mean, are they okay with the whole world going into a sort of hyperinflation and a sort of economic collapse? Is that what you think is coming? And why are they okay with it if that's the case?
Well, I think they just don't literally reason that that's a potential outcome of this conflict. So it isn't that that they knew this was going to happen. I think in many ways there'd be people inside those organisations who are serious researchers and have been looking at what Iran has been doing, getting intelligence on the mosaic defence pattern that Iran decided on, after they saw what America did to Iraq and Libya and so on, so that they can't be decapitated. So there would be an analyst down there who'd be screaming their lungs out, saying, "Don't take on Iran. It's prepared for the sort of attack you want to take against it," and others who know the pattern of goods that flow out of the Gulf of the Persian Gulf and the critical role that they play in the global economy, they would equally have been warning. But they don't listen to other people up the top. We have a decision-making process which basically glorifies testosterone at the top. We've literally got to the having seriously with that idiot Peter Hesgeth. I prefer him to call him Peter Hogsbreath, the so-called Secretary of War, who literally is now testing American military for their testosterone levels. It's all about gung-ho and believing that America is like a Hollywood version of itself rather than the real version. And they would be disparaging the advice they get from the lower down researchers who would actually have known the real situation. So when they now go into the war, they thought testosterone alone will win. Let's take out the leadership, which of course the mosaic defense pattern was already prepared for. Let's take out the commanders by killing their kids, and they're getting the commanders to turn up to get their children and then killing the commanders as well. All these sorts of tactics. Iran was prepared for it. And America would have had people who knew that, but their advice wasn't listened to because we have the testosterone-charged idiots at the top level, and they've just barged in here, and now they're finding out the hard way that the oil that comes out of the Persian Gulf is responsible for about 10% of global petroleum energy supplies, 20 or 30% of fertilizer, 20 to 50% of helium, 30 or 40% of sulfuric acid. All these things are critical for the production processes around the entire planet. And we've never had a conflict like this, which has cut off an essential artery for the global economy. And this is all catching the Americans by surprise. But I'm sure the Iranians themselves, they knew that they had the defense capabilities, but they also knew how critical that strait was. And they're playing an intelligent game against a bunch of testosterone-charged idiots. So to me, it's a huge mistake, and it shows the weakness of the Western political system, that we end up getting idiots like Donald Trump elected as president, and then he appoints his own equally testosterone-overloaded advisors, and they have no idea what they're doing until they've done it, and then it's too late to pull out.
And it seems that seasoned players like Benjamin Netanyahu, who certainly aren't stupid, have also played a hand in terms of manoeuvring the US into this kind of unwinnable war. Yet here we are, still seeing Donald Trump falling for the same manipulations. That's what many would argue. Is that your position?
Yeah. Again, I mean, the Israelis have always seen Iran as the major opponent they have. It used to be Egypt, but it's certainly drifted towards Iran, and they've managed to make deals with most of the Arab states, the Sunni side of the Muslim religion in that case. And also, often you have principalities and sultanates. You don't have democratic systems at all. But they've managed to persuade the very top echelons of those societies that it's in their interest to cooperate with Israel and to isolate Iran. And that's why all those American bases are on the Arabic side of the Persian Gulf, in the belief that the Israelis, the Americans, and the Arab states together can contain Iran. And the thing is, Iran was ready for it. I think one thing we're really learning from all the correspondence, the interviews we're seeing with Iranian leaders and so on, that's a very intelligent, sophisticated society. Nothing like the parody of it that would have been communicated by the West in the media and held by upper echelons of the political system as well. So it appears that Netanyahu seriously believed that take out the leadership, there'd be a revolt by the Persian people. No, when you take out the leadership of a society like that, they're already prepared for it. And in fact, even though, of course, there's internal conflict in Iran about the religious leadership of the country and many elements of it, this is united people. They see an existential threat, and it's actually strengthened the Iranian administration, hasn't weakened it.
Yes, well, it's clear that everything that Donald Trump seems to have done so far has made things worse. I mean, if he wanted regime change and as they put it, the Islamic Republic would say that we're a democratic, a kind of Velayat-e-Faqih system of democracy, not the same one that you have in the West. But that's become more intransigent. People are more supportive of that now. If he was looking for insurrections, well, he's enabled, I guess, the Iranian security services to go in and root out all of those, the agents or those people who were trying to overthrow the government, and probably had a massive purge triggered on that front. He's failed with trying to get the Kurds and other regional forces to stir and join him in terms of attacking Iran. I think that quite famously with the Kurds, certainly there was an open case of it being wanting to be done by the Americans, but Erdogan didn't back it up, and the Kurds also themselves aren't going for it, and the Iranians are also going after these potential insurgents by hitting them in their bases preemptively now. So it seems that the most obvious one that Trump has failed on is how he didn't manage to see that the shutting down of the Hormuz was something that he couldn't control, and that there was no way he could reopen it. And even now, his solution of blockading the blockade seems to be the best he can do, which is just absolutely mad, because it's going to cause all of his allies, himself, his own nation, and everybody in the world pain, and actually for no real gain, even for the US. How does he get out of this one? He's stuck in a corner, isn't he?
He is. Like, the only way he can get out is to lose and declare victory. That's really the only tactic he's got left, to pull out and say that, I've freed the Strait of Hormuz. The fact that it was open beforehand won't be discussed anymore. It's as if only through Donald Trump did we open up the territorial waters. Of course, this is the thing which people I don't think are conscious of. They think that the Strait of Hormuz is international waters and ships could be able to sail it freely through it. In fact, it's only 21 miles wide. The definition of territorial waters is 12 miles. So Oman and Iran both overlap across that. It's national waters you're passing through. And in some ways, it was a concession to the rest of the world that they didn't charge fees and didn't regulate the passage of ships through it. Now, Trump has given them every reason to both charge for transit through their national waters and to control it while they're being attacked by the Americans and their various allies. So, yeah, it's classic case of illusion, the self-delusion that Americans seem particularly capable of, leading to an action which leads to catastrophe in the real world. And the only way out of it is to back out, but Americans don't have a reverse gear.
Yeah, the consequences, of course, of all this for the global economy. Do you think, just looking into your crystal ball, people have been saying that, of course, the fertilizer supplies that already existed probably were okay for this, the planting season this time, but will they be available, and will they impact the world if this continues for any longer? And therefore, do you think Trump is even concerned with that kind of impact on the world, and what happens if fertilizers don't get to the places they need to get to?
Yeah, well, you've got Trump has got narcissistic personality disorder. You don't need to be a psychologist to observe that. It helps to have experienced one, and I have experienced one. And that's one reason why I expected the sort of behaviour he's been doing, because a narcissist wants to make it all about themselves. It's crazy to imagine that somebody who's the president of what was the most powerful country on the planet, and reckons he's not getting enough attention. But that's the narcissists are a sponge to be praised by the people, to be talking about them. If they're not being talked about, then they have to do something to cause it to be about them, and they'll do destructive stuff it doesn't have to be stuff which is constructive. They're happy to do destructive stuff, and then there are conversations about them, and then they're happy. So that's the sort of, delusional madman we've got in charge of America's politics. And he was an easy prey for Netanyahu to suggest something which he would then go ahead and do, whereas previous presidents were sensible enough to listen to their independent advisors and be told, don't invade Iran. So, yeah, there's no... Forget about trying to find any logic with Trump. It's really what is the nature of the American political system that enabled these ideas to be put forward in the first place. And that comes down to the military-industrial complex and the fact that they get very fat on government contracts And that's what they're basically exploiting. They're making money out of government money creation, not to build infrastructure and education systems and things we see in China, but to build weapons. And the big mistake they've made is to actually try to use those weapons.
So what do you see as an outcome? Say, let's go 6 months down the line, and let's say Trump continues, say, damn you all, I'm going to continue with this, neither war nor peace, but just this kind of incessant blockade and the continued kind of tit for tats. What do you see happening to us? I mean, what's going to happen in our supermarkets? What's going to happen to jobs? What's going to happen to the global south in terms of their manufacture, China, etc.? What impact will this have over a medium term if it continues?
Well, the main thing is taking away critical inputs for manufacturing. Because obviously energy is a critical input. And part of the strategy the Americans have had is to try to control global energy supplies. That's why they invaded Iraq. It's why they invaded Venezuela. So Venezuela was a success in that sense. I think that gave Trump a false sense that he could do the same thing to another country, several times larger and with a far different terrain and leadership. So what we're getting is, because we're cutting off between 3 and 10% of global energy supplies, we're cutting off 30% of fertilizer. It means that at some point we won't have enough energy for production processes, so less goods and services can be produced that way. But clearly the most critical one, I think, is the fertilizer. Second after that, I'd put sulfuric acid, because without fertilizer you can't grow food. And people aren't really aware of the extent to which we rely upon derivatives of oil mining to create food. So without the artificial fertilizers we create, the nitrogenous fertilizers and the phosphate-based fertilizers, without them, the estimates I've seen from agronomists are that the carrying capacity of the planet would be between 1 and 2 billion people. We've got 8 billion. With the fertilizer, we can feed 8.5 billion. We grow another 30% above that, which we waste. But once the fertilizer goes, it's more than linear. So like a 30% fall in fertilizer will at least cause a 30% fall in food output around the planet. We have other parts, the world might try to expand their fertilizer production, but they themselves have physical constraints. So we're going to see a fall in food production, and this will have impacts on all sorts of countries. Yes, of course, countries in the global south will suffer. We'll see famines occurring in countries like India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and so on. We might even see them in Western countries. And this is the thing which I hope will be a wake-up call for most people, and if it does start to happen, because the UK, where you and I are right now, imports at least 40% of its food. The drought that is now hitting the UK is affecting its own food production, so it's going to need more imports. And countries like Australia, which are net food exporters on a grand scale, if Australia produces about 7 times as much food as it actually consumes, apparently because of the increase in the price of fertiliser, Australian wheat farmers have sowed about half the normal acreage. And then you'll get other countries where the fertiliser doesn't even turn up. And that's going to be, it depends upon stocks being run down right now as to when it manifests itself. But food supplies are going to fall, and they could fall below, potentially, substantially below what's necessary to keep the all 8.5 billion of us alive. So there'll be famines popping up all over the place. There'll be food which is too expensive for the poor in various countries. I think we're going to be forced into food rationing in some countries to make sure that people don't starve because they're poor. And that's not something which has ever happened in a Western country before, but I think it's quite feasible out of this conflict. Then the sulfur dioxide is critical for so many manufacturing processes. The simplest one to talk about being producing copper. You have to use sulfuric acid to refine the ores. If you lose 30% of the world's sulfuric acid, you lose the capacity to produce the copper, which is essential for the data centers and the robots and the AI that people think is going to continue developing. So we're going to be breaking down our manufacturing processes, and this is going to have 2 consequences. First of all, the products won't exist. They're going to be more expensive. But the real problem is that we will just not be able to make the goods and services, and therefore firms won't be able to service the debts that they've got. So every corporation has working capital debts. They've borrowed money to be able to maintain their payment system. They won't be able to maintain the payments if they can't sell the goods. So we're going to see a financial consequence as well. It's all a question of, how many stocks exist of all these goods in the rest of the world, how fast they're being run down. And that's something which all sorts of variations can disturb what you might expect to have happen. So I thought we'd start seeing energy shortages by now, for example, but it turned out one reason we haven't seen that is China had reserves of about 1.5 years worth of oil for its own consumption, and it ran that down initially. So the loss of the flow of new goods from the Strait of Hormuz didn't cause a loss in availability because China was basically selling its reserves onto the international market at a substantial profit. Now there seem to be restocking. So all these things get in the way of being able to time it. But ultimately, if the Strait of Hormuz remains closed, and it's clearly going to remain closed for much longer than it has already, then those stocks will be depleted. You won't have the flow of goods to replenish them, and the production processes that depend upon those inputs won't be possible. And we'll see both the financial consequence of that and also physical consequences, which we haven't experienced outside of global war.
Well, that paints a pretty gloomy picture. You'd have thought at some stage the two forces that we talked about earlier, the Larry Finks and the kind of the financial powers that are not necessarily governmental, and say state powers like China, superpowers like China and Russia, you'd have thought at some stage they would be looking at this scenario that Trump is creating, and they would have to take much more stern measures to try and avert it. The financial powers seem to be hand in glove with the industrial military complex. So they're making money on one side and they might be losing on the other. So it's a sort of balancing act for them. But for China, there's only a lose-lose. If they continue with this scenario, on the one hand, it means that their access to energy, and they're one of the biggest consumers of energy from that region as well, will be seriously affected. And that would hit their industry, it would hit their manufacturing base, which in turn would hit the rest of the world's economies if the Chinese economy was rattled. So is there anything that either the Chinese or these financial, these kinds of strangely, and in fact, the fact is China is also interlinked with the US economically. So both these financial powerhouses, which are sort of private sector, and China are both actually interlinked with the US economy, the US dollar. What happens to that? What happens to these kinds of entities, institutions, if you like?
I think part of what's happening in China, I'm guessing here, but it makes sense to me historically and in terms of their current development process as well. China vividly remembers the century of humiliation, as it's called, the Opium Wars, where the West fought to maintain the capacity to export opium to China and basically destroyed the culture in the 19th century. That's something which is deeply ingrained in the Chinese psyche. Every school kid learns about it. This basically teaches you can't trust the West. You must be able to be as self-sufficient as possible. I think this has been China's strategy to a large degree simply for historical reasons. Now, when they're seeing what the West has done to Venezuela, now what it's doing to Iran, and of course what's already happened with Syria and and Libya and all the other parts of the West has invaded, they're saying we have to be able to be self-sufficient. So I've got a feeling, and also the electrification, what they're doing in terms of solar power and wind power and nuclear, the whole idea is to get off dependence of oil as fast as they can. So I think China will be, as they're trying to get an oil pipeline to get the oil and evade the whole blockage of the Strait of Hormuz in that way. But ultimately, I think their objective is to eliminate reliance upon imported energy completely. And if they do that, then it becomes America's problem because a large part of the financial interests that drive the American government are basically based in oil and weaponry. And if the oil profitability disappears, then they suffer. So they want this conflict to mean that America becomes dominant over Iran's oil supplies. Well, that ain't going to happen. And the Iranians are going to win this. They've already won it in a technical sense. Unless America goes all out or Israel goes out and bombs them with nuclear weapons, Iran is going to emerge as the new power. And China will be independent of oil. It won't be able to be manipulated by the Americans. So this is a real and massive strategic mistake. They would have been better off continuing to posture that their military is the most powerful on the planet. The biggest mistake they ever made was trying to use their military.
Well, we've covered, I think, the military and the economic side really well, but there is just one other area which it doesn't get touched on a lot, but it also has an impact economically and politically, and that is that the US seems to be deliberately conducting an ecocide. It's been revealed over the last week or so that 20-kilometer oil slick is already there in the Hormuz, which is going to cause massive pollution, no doubt. The oil installations have been bombed by the Americans deliberately. Refineries have been bombed. A lot of other infrastructure which creates pollution and damage have been bombed, especially across the south coast of Iran, but also Tehran. We've even had, we've had like an oily rain, kind of, which has been falling in Tehran as well. These are all factors which are added to the reality that something like 85 tankers, which were stranded, started accumulating things like barnacles and algae and other sort of microbial, anomalies in the Hormuz, which are also going to threaten to basically overwhelm the environment. And I think it's an area which has been ignored. But like the environmental disaster there, and then if we add that to the Bab el-Mandeb, which has also been semi-closed by the Yemenis, and the idea of the Suez Canal perhaps also being shut down as a result of the Red Sea, struggle for the Red Sea. I mean, these are just two more areas where environmental damage, certainly on the maritime scale, it has economic consequences as well. That too, of course, contradicts those green policies that we've had rammed down our throats for so long. And here we have an industrial military complex which has no concern about the environment. And the way it's conducting that war seems to be a deliberate ecocide and a deliberate triggering of environmental disasters.
We're committing ecocide on a global scale anyway. This is what really concerns me, because and here I don't blame Donald Trump, I blame the economics profession. That's why I call myself an anti-economist when I introduce myself socially. Economists have drastically underestimated the importance of energy as an input to production, and they've drastically underestimated the damage we're doing to the planet by using fossil fuels to generate the energy, creating carbon dioxide, trapping more of the sun's heat that comes into our planet, warming the planet to a level where we start breaking down the stability of the climate, which enabled us to develop advanced civilizations in the first place. So this is delusions leading us into these traps. And I can't think of anybody who's more deluded than Americans, who seem to, their vision of what their country is like seems to come through Hollywood movies rather than through reality.
Well, on a final note, your conclusion and what you see in the immediate future and in the long run, just a final assessment from yourself, Professor.
Well, there has to be a financial crisis coming out of this, because so many companies aren't going to be able to produce the goods that they need to sell to be able to service the debts they've got. So we're going to see financial consequences coming out of this. To some extent, that's attenuated by the fact that oils will become more expensive, so they'll make a larger dollar profit that way. But if you're trying to sell, if you're trying to sell sulfur dioxide-based products like copper, and you can't produce them because you haven't got the sulfur dioxide, then those companies are going to go bankrupt. The amount of food produced is going to fall. The technology necessary for the data centers won't be able to be rolled out as fast as they hope. And so it's a crisis we've never had before, in the sense that wars normally, the collateral damage of a war occurs to the civilians when the war zone itself. This time around, the collateral damage is going to be absorbed by the rest of the global economy, and we're going to find it's much more fragile than we were led to believe. So production will fall because of the drop of oil, food production will fall, there'll be food shortages, there'll be famines, there may be food riots, all this sort of stuff, which we're going to experience over the next year or so. And the only way to attenuate it is to end the war, but then we're going to have the consequences of the damage done, continuing to weaken our capacity to produce goods and services and making our damage to the climate even worse. So to me, the only positive thing I can say out of this is that what Trump has done with the closure of the Gulf of Hormuz is a foretaste of what global warming is going to do. And if it's a wake-up call the rest of the world takes seriously and realizes just what a critical point we're at right now, then that might be beneficial. But I can just see us continue to blunder our way into a situation where we can no longer produce the goods and services we rely upon, and we'll start seeing a decline in industrial production. even before global warming starts wiping out our productive capabilities as well.
Professor Steve Keen, that's been a fascinating journey, and obviously a lot of prophecy of doom, but it's realism. And I guess the citizens are left questioning, we're left questioning who we've elected into power and what the real purpose of these people is. Donald Trump claimed he was coming in with an agenda of no war, and that was his idea of making America great. He seems to have plumbed for America being diminished, and actually Israel being his real greatness project. It seems as though his midterm elections are coming. Perhaps that's the time when the American public can show its disfavor, and that may have some consequences and may disempower the military-industrial complex, which Professor Steve Keen has laid a lot of the blame on here. Who knows? The fact of the matter is, in oligarchical democracies, which is what I think a lot of our Western establishments have become, it's very hard to get the people's voice, the people's desires actually implemented. And it seems as though increasingly we have to question our own democracy and how it functions. Because if we can't hold leaders to accountability, and if they do things which we didn't want them to do, clearly the Americans didn't want Trump to go to war. He's completely gone against their wishes and sided with money, power, and done what its bidding is. That seems to me a clarion call for some kind of reformation or some kind of revolution within our democracies that is really important to think about. Not just look at where the symptoms are, or what the damage is, or the kind of the doom reality which seems to be emerging, but actually to take control, take charge, and be more proactive in the way we shape our futures. Thank you for, again, Professor Steve Keen, and thank you for watching Deep Dive Perspective. Do check out Professor Steve Keen on his Twitter, I've said, or rather X these days. That's where I pick up most of his really very, very useful insights on economy and otherwise. Do like, share, subscribe to Deep Dive Perspective. We need your support. And until the next edition, goodbye.